present, over 10,000 baby boomers are turning 65 every day. In what way would we fund their promised retirement benefits that they have been paying into?
In what way would I promise those benefits?
In what way would we fund their promised retirement benefits that they have been paying into?
By creative financing. In the budget right now, we're making cuts, we're reallocating funds. You have to reallocate those funds to those programs that would help them in their retirement. You have to be able to find that money, create the new revenues that's going to be able to finance that retirement. The way you do that is job creation. The way you do that is investing in our future, investing in education so those people that are going to go to work in the future can finance that retirement. Thank you.
That's a very serious issue. You know, I'm a grandmother, so I really look at that very seriously. But no, we all know that the Social Security program belongs to each and every one of us. We all pay into it. That is our money. Now, is it going to be there when it's time for us to take advantage? Probably not at the rate that we're going. But let me tell you, back in the early 1990s, we had a surplus in our Social Security. We had a Social Security Trust Fund surplus. Do you know what happened to it? There were some policymakers that decided to go ahead and borrow from it in order to give a tax break to the top 1% of the wealthiest of our nation. I'm not talking wealthy people, but this is a reality. They took the money from our Social Security Trust Fund to be able to pay for those tax breaks. They have to reverse those tax breaks and put the money back in our Social Security Trust Fund. And that's what I would certainly be fighting for very, very seriously, is to make sure that they keep their hands off that Social Security Trust Fund, because each and every one of us are putting money into it. It's a system that is paid for and that could be solvent if they just stop robbing from that trust fund. Thank you very much.
As your congressman, I would protect Social Security and Medicare. There's no changes that I would support, none whatsoever. You know, I was city manager of the community, and every year you're faced with a constraint of balancing the budget, which I balanced 2 years in a row. And it's a matter of priority, folks. Social Security, as was mentioned, everybody that's paid into it deserves to have a return, deserves their Social Security benefits. They don't deserve any changes to it, none whatsoever. As I started mentioning, as city manager, you know, I balance a $100 million budget. And it's up to each and every one of us to look at what are our priorities. What is it that we need to do to balance our budget? And I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that as your congressman, retirement, Social Security, and Medicare will be off limits for me. Those are areas that I will protect fully. My background is in job creation, but also my other priorities protecting these Social Security and Medicare. And I will fight for any changes that are out there, whether it's increasing the retirement age, or whether it's privatizing it. I will not stand for any of that. As your congressman, I will fight hard to make sure it is there for all the people that put their lives, all the payments into it over their lifetime. Thank you.
Social Security and Medicaid, those are benefits that have to be increased from my point of view. Social Security, talking to my grandparents, trying to live on what they worked their entire life on Social Security, that's ridiculous. This country ought to be ashamed of itself. The money that we spend on things that is ridiculous, that we can't take care of our sick and our elderly, that should not happen, ladies and gentlemen. We should increase that. Where do we get the money for that, you say? Medical costs, aren't they outrageous? Who hasn't gone to a medical clinic and said, wait a minute, how come it's costing that much for me and it's costing something else for somebody else, and then for somebody else a completely different price? The fraud and waste and abuse in the medical industry is outrageous. There's no policies or procedures for that. In the entire state of Texas, there's 7 places, 7 offices that's in charge of trying to detect fraud and waste in the entire state of Texas. They probably can do 7 offices here in Brownsville alone. If you stop the fraud and abuse, you're going to see a lot of money that's left over. Ladies and gentlemen, that border wall, that lovely border wall that our government decided to put up there, estimates $300 to $1.7 billion per mile to construct and maintain. We have 100 of that mile of those miles here in the valley. 100 of those miles, folks. How much of that money could be used for Medicaid, Social Security? How much of that money could be used to educate children, to protect you and me? Folks, the money's not being spent wisely. If I get to DC with your help, I'm going to make sure we do something to change that. Thank you.
It's their money. End of story. They deserved it. They worked for it. They put it in there. It belongs to them. It does not need to be touched. I talked to my mother not too long ago. My mother is 82 years old, and she's taking care of my aunt who's got Alzheimer's, and she's 88 years old. Mother is in good health, thanks to God. But she goes out of her way taking care of her sister because this is all they have. They live on Social Security and Medicare, and that's what they depend on. She says, Rose, when you go up to Congress, you tell them to leave that Social Security and Medicare alone, and I intend to do just that.
When it comes to Social Security, we have to understand that there are many people out there who get a Social Security check who don't necessarily even want the check. They don't send it back, but they don't necessarily want it because Social Security is something that is determined by age and not by income. So you can have somebody who can live very well under retirement and still get a Social Security check. That is one of the things that the federal government needs to look into, and that is part of that fraud and that waste that we all talk about. 20 to 30% of the programs are riddled with fraud and waste. And if we did clean that up, yes, we would have some money left over. But here's a statistic. In 20 years from now, 75% of our federal tax income will go to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Now think about it, folks, 75%. We're all up here talking about how we're going to fund the highway, how we're going to fund the schools, and how we're going to fund Social Security on top of that. We just don't have that kind of money. Now, as a congresswoman, my goal would be, one, the people that we have promised Social Security to, they should get it, absolutely, because they have depended on it. As individuals, we are going to have to also do our part to make sure that our elderly parents, grandmothers or grandfathers or brothers and sisters are taken care of by us. We have to take some of the responsibility upon ourselves. And secondly, there are many young adults here in this room right now who clearly don't expect to have anything back as far as Social Security is concerned. We need to offer them the opportunity to have a thriving economy so that they can work, keep more of their income so that they can invest it as they see fit into their personal retirements. There's no reason why for this future generation that they have to take their hard-earned dollar, send it to Washington so that it sits in some vault up there, and then later when they're over 65 they can go ahead and beg and ask for it back. So we need to start thinking outside the box because we are not living in the America that we lived in 30 years ago.
How a community, how a nation takes care of its elderly, its poor, its weak, says a lot about the viability of that community. And for us to abdicate or to take money away from the Social Security Trust is appalling. And that's exactly what's happened over the last 8 years. It's been stopped, or it's starting to stop, because of the outrage and disgust that we have for lawmakers that do that. There was a surplus in Social Security. We could have taken care of people into the future, but we decided that what we wanted to do was give tax breaks to the wealthiest, and we wanted to fight a war that was Al-Qaeda from Iran. I don't think so. It becomes a question of where do we allocate our resources? What is important to us as a community? Obviously, our children need to have health care. Our elderly need to be taken care of. And I don't think anyone at this table is going to disagree with that. It's wrong to take and rob from one fund to benefit a small group of people. And I won't stand for it, and I don't think you should either.